All right, and we are here with the one and only.
Yes, Ben Bleiweiss, here I am. Because we're in the judges' room here at the StarCityGames Center, which is one of those secret rooms that you may not be privy to if you're a player.
That's true.
And it's sort of like a little 6x10 tomb. So
some would call this a cell.
I've been playing for probably about 12, 13 years now, since 94-ish, the tail end of Legends and when Revise started. You know, pretty much I just wandered into a lounge in one of the dorms that I was playing in. I was attending Tulane University at the time, and I just wandered into some guys in an honors dorm who were playing this card game in the lobby, and I was like, hey, what's this? And, you know, sure enough, 12 years later, here I am at StarCityGames, and, you know, thousands of dollars poorer for it. I've been here 5 years now. Pretty much the abridged version of how I ended up here was that I was doing tournament coverage for Wizards of the Coast. That pretty much stemmed from me writing for MagicTheGathering.com. I started on that as one of the first columnists for the site. I'd written a rebuttal article to somebody about Magic rarities, and
on MagicTheGathering.com?
On StarCityGames.
Oh, okay, on StarCityGames.
I wrote a rebuttal article because he had a lot of his facts wrong. And just by complete coincidence, Mark Rosewater was pitching the idea of MagicTheGathering.com to the higher-ups at Hasbro as a way to promote the game. And one of the 5 initial columns that they wanted to write was one about Magic history. And here it happens, out of the blue, my first article in 2 years since I stopped writing for the dojo, and I have this article that is basically, you know, a 10,000-word history piece about the history of what the rarities of Magic mean to Magic. And based on that, Mark Rosewater contacts me and says, hey, we're having Pro Tour New Orleans, I'd like to come talk to you. And, you know, for me, I thought I was about to get banned from the Pro Tour because of all the times I heckled Mark during his Magic trivia shows. But no, it turns out Mark was looking to hire me as one of the first 5 writers for MagicTheGathering.com to do a Magic history column.
Wow.
And from that, I started ending up doing event coverage at some of the tournaments because Aaron Forsyth, who was then the editor and now one of the writers for MagicTheGathering.com, was one of the event coverage heads. Either way, I did pretty horrible day 1, and instead of playing into PTQ day 2, Aaron talked me into doing event coverage, and that worked out pretty well, and from there I just started being part of the event coverage team. The only problem with that, and you know, I don't really want to badmouth any one particular person, but there were problems with me getting paid, and there was a point where, you know, I was about 8 months backlog on being paid for doing event coverage, and I'm having to explain to my dad, you know, hey, I'm about to get evicted, can you lend me money? And he says, well, you know, you told me you have this job writing, where's the money? I'm like, look, I'm trying to get paid, but... And I think that led actually to standardization now, where writers are paid more on an invoice basis within a certain time period, versus just sort of whenever whoever was head of events at the time felt like paying you. But because of that, I went to the person who was the head of coverage at that point and basically said to them, but I said, hey, I really need to get paid on a regular basis and maybe have some sort of contract or I can't do this anymore. And he basically said, okay, bye. So
wow.
I'm sitting there trying to figure out what I'm going to do at that point for money. And out of the blue, Pete Hofling gives me a call up, who is the owner of StarCityGames, and says, hey, my business is really growing. I'm thinking of creating this position to help out the Magic cards. You know, would that be something you're interested in? And, you know, I say to him, Pete, I'll take the job. What's it pay? When do you want me there?
Wow.
And he says, no, hold on. You know, you don't understand. I'm thinking of creating this position. I'm trying to gauge the interest. And I said, no, you don't understand. I'll take the job. When do you want me there? What's it pay? And, you know, 2 weeks later, on Valentine's Day, here I am in Roanoke, Virginia.
And you've never left.
I've never left. One of my dubious distinctions is that any city that I live in for a long period of time and then leave, the city has a unmitigated disaster happen to it. Because, I grew up in New York and went to high school and spent, you know, a lot of years in New York City, both going to high school and then working when I took some time off from college at Neutral Ground. and then I leave New York to go to New Orleans, and 9/11 happens.
Wow.
And then, I'm in New Orleans, finishing up at Tulane and graduating, and then Pete offers me this job. I leave New Orleans, and then Hurricane Katrina happens.
Wow.
So whatever disastrous, mountainous hurricanes / snowfall / tornadoes finally touch down and can't get out of the valley here in Roanoke is going to happen. Pete ever parts ways with me for whatever reason, someone else here better hire me or Roanoke's gone.
Roanoke better watch out.
Yeah, it's over for Roanoke. It's sort of weird. The busier I get, the more I seem to volunteer to do articles, where I think there were 2 weeks where I had 3 articles a week that I was doing in the middle of basically going out of town every single weekend and getting ready for Planar Chaos's release and doing the Planar Chaos pre-release. Mm-hmm. And by the end of that, I just want to curl up in a ball and die. And so...
I understand the pool of deadlines.
I think...
Did you see you're doing this for a while now? You're okay with the 2 articles a week?
Yeah, I don't mind that at all, because one of the things that writing for building on a budget is a really good challenge that I hadn't initially saw. Because I really do have to build within a lot of constraints for deck building. I can't just say, hey, here's all these great Ravnica dual lands, and here's all these fetch lands if I'm playing extended, and let's build anything we can think of because the mana base will support it. Right. It's pretty much like, if I have 3 Ravnica dual lands in the deck, my deck's going to be like 47 forests and 4 common green creatures that end in grizzly and begin in bears, so they'll be like bear grizzlies. I go in there, I do my best to build a competitive deck at 30 tickets or less on Magic Online, and I try not to read the forums sometimes on that, because it gets a little discouraging, but I get a lot of email privately that equals the amount of, hate forum posts I get. Like, people just sort of don't get what the column's about.
Right.
But I think between a lot of the decks I've posted, including the 8-post deck that went on to, as far as I was told, finish first in the Swiss in PTQ in England last week, and unfortunately lost in the top 8, but, that's the first 8-post deck so far that was like my build that made the top 8 of PTQ. So, if you guys are out there, play that deck. Because, I got enough crap in our forums about that, and I know it can win.
Holy cow,
so.
They went off, didn't they?
It was crazy, but, I guess I did take a, hey, here's the greatest thing since sliced bread tone, but, it is, so hey. As far as our writers go, I think it's the same thing in that there were some writers who were definitely negatively affected by people just going in and saying, like, this sucked, or, things that weren't constructive. There'll be times when people write articles now and people say, hey, this article is really bad because of X, Y, and Z. But, if they have a reason for it, like, by all means, there's a huge difference between saying, God, this article sucks, I hope you die in a fire, and, man, I really didn't like this article, like, you didn't say much, you kept repeating yourself, and you were boring. Like, it's still not positive, but it is positive feedback in that you're really framing it in a, here's the reason why it wasn't good, and it gives the author feedback that they can use to improve. Yes.
Both
definitely.
in personal and business-wise?
Yeah, it sold terrifically. Everyone's been really hyped about the set, and I think the concept of the set of just taking cards that were all previously playable and making them in new colors isn't going to make them, for the most part, less playable. So just for a percentage of playables in the set, all the shifted cards have at least some degree of something. And I think that even more so than Time Spiral, which brought people back into the game who hadn't played for years for the nostalgia factor, this one really just showed, hey, we're going to cram like 1 billion playable cards in this set and let you guys figure it out. And I think, in fact, this set really does have the highest percentage of playables to cards in the set of any set in Modern Magic, just straight out. There's just so many cards that reflect Wizards' new philosophy of, hey, let's make all the good cards tier 2 and no tier 1 like Necropotence or Armageddon level cards. So that way you're basically just having a whole bunch of good cards in a field where no one thing dominates. It opens up to make a lot more of the fringe cards playable, which is good because it helps sell the sets, because the more decks that are viable, the more cards that people are going to want to buy. It makes people feel that their decks have a shot. So instead of just having the 1 or 2 archetypes, I think back to Odyssey times, and Odyssey Block Constructed was the worst thing ever. Because you basically had Mono Black Control, Blue-Green Madness, and some other deck that I'm forgetting right now. if I didn't pay attention to spoilers, then if there's some card that came out that would completely break an older card, then, it'd be negligent of me not to be on top of that and say, like, hey, all of a sudden this stuff's going to start shooting up. Why wasn't I paying attention? I mean, one example of that would be Damnation. You see Damnation come out, and the first thing you think is, wow, every Black X color combination is going to start skyrocketing in value in Standard. And so the first thing I did when they announced Damnation was just raise the price on a lot of our black-blue dual lands, because Underground Seas and Underground Rivers, and not so much polluted deltas because of extended, but watery grays were all sort of, I guess, at the ass end of the scale on the 10 dual land scale. But the second they announced Damnation, the first thing I did was raise the prices and buy out like several other dealers because it was at an all-time low. And if anything, everyone's pretty much projecting at this point that black-blue control is going to be a huge deck in Standard. And if I wasn't paying attention to any sort of spoilers, then pretty much we would have just been caught up with everyone else. The extended tournament this season have just been record-breaking. Pretty much, if you've been following the numbers that PTQs have been getting, this season is going to set a record for attendance at Pro Tour qualifiers.
Wow.
I think Philadelphia got about 240 players for a one-slot qualifier. There's one in Kentucky today that got 140 players. Ours in West Virginia got close to 100 players, and this is West Virginia we're talking about.
Right.
So I think that the Grand Prix that's coming up, I would not be surprised if they got at least 1,000 people for that tournament, just because it's that popular this season. And everything that's been a problem in past extended seasons, last year was pretty good too, but towards the end, I think that the popular understanding was that Frigoride would have just completely ruined the environment.
Yeah.
But now that Wizards pretty much planted in stuff like Tormod's Crypt and I guess Extirpate in this new set, but basically just things that can hose the graveyard a little better than was available back then. Ideally, Extended should be the healthiest format in Magic, just by virtue of how many cards are in the pool, but none of them are the broken cards like Moxes or Lotuses or Mana Drains or anything like that. And, it's pretty much evidenced by, if you go back to Pro Tour Houston, where Your Move Games piloted 3 separate decks to top 3 finishes, and they were 3 radically different archetypes. That tournament just was filled with different decks in the top 32, where there's a huge variety of decks. And if you fast forward to Pro Tour New Orleans, when they had all the Tinker decks that basically broke the format, that was horrible format, because you basically had 6 of the 8 decks were Tinker decks, one Tog deck and another Tinker deck that was a different build of a Tinker deck, but it was still a Tinker deck, with 24 other Tinker decks in the top 32.
Right.
It was just a horrible format, and the PTQ format suffered until they banned all the cards midway through. But by then, the format changed so much that people sort of lost interest and didn't know what to prepare for, and that whole season was a bust. Since then, Extended's gotten a lot better, but I think it's what Wizards uses as a benchmark of what's healthy as far as tournament play goes, because you can't really have that many standard PTQs because it's the format of state championships and regionals and a whole bunch of other major tournaments that it would sort of start getting redundant if they used it for every format. So Extended's pretty much like the staple, let's get people out here, and even if they don't play Standard every year, a lot of these decks are pretty much tweakable from year to year with some changes with new technology.
Right.
With the attendance being as great as it's been for this extended season, I think it's just an unqualified success, and it says how much Magic tournament play has recovered since it pretty much took back-to-back hits with how broken Affinity was, and then how bad Kamigawa block was.
But thanks for your time. I really appreciate you talking to me.
No, thanks, Evan. Take
Thanks a
care.
lot.